Snow drifted over the small town of Raven Creek, layering the roofs and streets in soft white silence. The church bells had already begun to ring in the distance, calling families to gather. Through the glowing windows of warm houses, laughter and the smell of roasted turkey filled the night. But far down Willow Street, where the lamplight grew thin and the road turned toward the river, a small girl was bending over a wooden crate. Her name was Clara Wynn, 6 years old. The sleeves of her wool coat hung past her fingers, and the hat on her head sagged to one side. She was counting the bundles of matches she had tied with a string that afternoon. 30, she whispered, her breath fogging the air. If I sell them all, Papa can have his medicine. Inside the tiny shack behind her, a candle flickered weakly beside the bed. Her father, Alden Wynn, lay wrapped in an old blanket, his face pale beneath the dim light. Once he had been a carpenter known for his gentle laugh and steady hands. But since the accident that damaged his mind, he was no longer the same. Some days he spoke clearly, others he forgot his own name. Clara touched his forehead and whispered, "I'll hurry, Papa. I'll be back before the snow gets deep." Alden opened his eyes halfway, smiling faintly. "My little spark," he murmured, his voice soft and slurred. "Don't let the cold find you." Clara nodded. She adjusted the glass over the candle so the wind wouldn't blow it out, then stepped outside, pulling the door tight behind her. The sky above was deep blue, filled with slow-falling snow. She clutched her tin box of matches close to her chest and began walking toward town. The air stung her cheeks, but she kept going, the rhythm of her boots crunching softly in the snow. As she neared Main Street, the sound of music drifted from the church, a group of carolers singing Silent Night. For a moment she stopped and listened. The voices were beautiful, warm, full of something she couldn't name. Then she walked on. The bakery on the corner was still open. Each time the door swung wide, heat poured out into the cold night, along with the smell of cinnamon and bread. People hurried in and out with boxes tied in ribbons. Clara stood near the lamppost, holding up a bundle of matches. "Matches, ma'am." "Just $1," she said politely. Her voice was small, almost lost in the wind. A woman passed without hearing her. A man in a thick coat walked by, shaking his head. Clara moved closer to the light. "Please, sir," matches, she tried again. No one stopped. The snow kept falling heavier now, gathering on her hat and shoulders. After a while, her hands felt stiff and red. She rubbed them together, blowing into her pumice. Her fingers were so cold that she could barely feel the tin box anymore. Across the street stood Cline's general store, its sign glowing yellow through the storm. Inside, she saw Mr. Harold Cline behind the counter, his face hard and serious as he counted money. Clara bit her lip. He was the one who had rented the small room behind the shop, and he was the one who had said, "If you don't pay me by Christmas, you're out." She turned away quickly. She didn't want him to see her here, not before she had the money. The street emptied as the night grew colder. Families hurried home, cars hummed past, and lights began to fade from the windows. Clara wandered to the bus stop near the end of the block. The bench was dusted with snow. The glass shelter cracked in one corner. She sat down, her feet aching. For a while, she simply watched the snow fall, thousands of flakes spinning silently in the wind. Then she opened the tin box and took out one match. Her small hand trembled as she struck it. The flame leapt to life, golden and warm, flickering against the glass wall. For that brief moment, the cold didn't matter. The light painted her face in soft orange, and she smiled faintly. "Merry Christmas, Papa," she whispered. The match burned low, then went out, leaving a curl of smoke and darkness. She stared at the blackened stick in her fingers, then reached for another match. Just then, the quiet broke a deep sound of tires crunching over ice. A sleek black SUV slowed at the corner, its headlights sweeping across the snow. Inside, a man sat behind the wheel, his face half hidden in shadow. Lucan Graves had been driving for hours, hoping to escape the city and the noise of celebration. He told himself he wanted silence, but the truth was he wanted to forget. And now, through the curtain of falling snow, he saw a flicker of orange, a child's hand holding a flame beneath a streetlight. He stared for a long time. The image stirred something in him he hadn't felt for years, a memory perhaps, or a wound. Without quite knowing why, he turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and began to walk toward the small figure sitting alone in the snow. Lucan Graves stepped out of the car, and the first breath of winter air stung his face. Snow crunched beneath his polished boots. For a moment, he simply stood there, the cold wind curling around him like a question he didn't know how to answer. The little girl under the streetlight hadn't noticed him yet. She sat on the bench, her back bent against the glass, shielding a small flame with her hands. "Hey there," he said gently. Clara turned sharply, the match's light flickering across her face. Her eyes widened, startled. For a second, she seemed ready to run, but the voice that had spoken was calm, low, and kind. "It's all right," Lucan added quickly. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Clara blinked, studying him. The man was tall, wearing a long black coat, snow clinging to his shoulders. His voice didn't sound like Mr. Cline's or any of the others who shouted at her to move away from their doors. There was something quiet in it, maybe a bit of sadness. I'm selling matches," she said finally. "Just $1 a box." Lucan looked down at the small tin box in her lap. The matches were bundled neatly tied with a string. Her fingers were red from cold, her nails pale blue. "How long have you been out here?" Clara shrugged. "Since the lights came on." "I need to sell enough to buy medicine for my papa." The word papa caught somewhere deep in Lucan's chest. For a moment he couldn't answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wallet, but something stopped him. The easy thing would be to give her a few bills and leave. Yet watching her shiver, he realized money wasn't what she needed most. "Where's your home?" he asked instead. Clara hesitated. "Just down there," she said, nodding toward the alley that led behind Cline's store. "Papa's sick. He forgets things sometimes. But he's kind." Lucan knelt so their eyes were level. "And this Mr. Cline, does he help you?" Her small shoulders tensed. "He says we have to pay rent. If we don't, we have to go." She bit her lip, then looked away. "But I can sell matches. I always sell enough." Lucan's throat tightened. She said it with such certainty, as if the whole world depended on her tiny box of matches. "Do you like Christmas?" he asked softly. Clara nodded. "Papa used to make me wooden birds every year. He says they can carry wishes if you blow on them." Lucan smiled faintly. "That's a good kind of magic." The girl studied him, her expression curious. "You sound sad, mister. Don't you have anyone to give you a bird?" He didn't answer right away. For years he had built walls of silence around himself. Meetings, travel, expensive distractions. Yet this child sitting in the snow had seen through it in a single glance. "No," he said at last. "Not for a long time." The wind howled through the empty street. Clara's candle had burned out, leaving only a thin wisp of smoke. Lucan noticed how she was shaking, her boots soaked through. "You're freezing," he said. "Come on, there's a cafe down the street. You can warm up." Clara shook her head quickly. "I can't leave. If Mr. Cline sees me, he'll be angry. I promised to sell them all." Lucan straightened, unsure what to do. He glanced toward the store, the windows still glowing. The man inside moving about like a restless shadow. His jaw tightened. Something inside him, long dormant, began to stir a mix of anger and compassion. "Tell you what," he said gently. "I'll buy all of them. Every match you've got." Clara's mouth opened in surprise. "All of them," he nodded. "All of them. But only if you come sit in the cafe with me while I count them. Deal?" Her eyes lit up like the flame she had just lost. She nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir." Lucan took her small hand, cold trembling, and together they walked toward the glowing lights of the cafe. Inside, warmth enveloped them instantly. The scent of coffee and cinnamon filled the air. People glanced up, curious at the sight of a businessman with a tiny snow-covered girl at his side. They sat by the window. A waitress brought a cup of hot chocolate, and Clara wrapped both hands around it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Lucan laid a $100 bill on the table beside her matches. "That's for all of them," he said. Clara's eyes widened. "That's too much." "Maybe," he replied softly, "but tonight I think a little light is worth a lot." She smiled, the first true smile he had seen in years. Small, shy, but so bright it seemed to melt the winter air around them. Outside, the snow kept falling silent and endless. And for the first time in a long while, Lucan Graves felt something warm flicker inside him. Something he thought had died long ago. The cafe was nearly empty now. A faint tune from the radio played in the background, a soft carol about peace and home. Clara sat quietly, sipping the last of her hot chocolate, her small hands cupped around the warm mug as if afraid the heat might vanish. Lucan watched her from across the table. Outside, the storm had thickened, wrapping the town in a blur of white. He could have offered to call someone, a social worker, maybe the police, but he knew how those stories ended. Too many forms, too much waiting. This child needed help tonight. Clara, he said gently, why don't I drive you home? I'd like to make sure your father's all right. Her eyes darted up, nervous. You don't have to, mister. I can walk. It's not far. I don't mind, Lucan replied. Besides, I promised to make sure my purchase was delivered safely, didn't I? That made her giggle a little. The sound, light and fragile, cut through the silence like a bell. After a moment, she nodded. They stepped back into the snow. The night was darker now, the streets almost deserted. Lucan opened the car door and helped her climb inside. The heater hummed softly as they drove past shuttered shops and glowing porches. Do you and your father live near the store? He asked. Clara nodded. Behind it in a room Mr. Cline rents to us. It's small, but Papa says it's cozy when the candle's lit. Lucan said nothing. The mention of Harold Cline stirred something unpleasant. He had seen the man's type before, those who measured kindness by profit. When they turned the corner, Clara pointed to a dim alley. That's it. Lucan parked near the curb and followed her through the snow. The wind funneled between the buildings, sharp and biting. At the end of the alley stood a small wooden door with peeling paint. Clara reached for the handle, but before she could open it, a harsh voice called out, Where have you been, girl? Lucan turned. A heavy-set man emerged from the shadows. Coat collar pulled high, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Harold Cline! His eyes glinted with irritation. I was selling matches, Clara stammered. I sold them all. Harold snorted. You sold nothing unless I see the money. You think you can cheat me, huh? You and that half-wit father of yours owe me rent. Lucan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. That's enough. She's a child. Cline's gaze shifted to him, surprised, then mocking. And who are you supposed to be? Another charity case or just bored enough to play hero tonight? Lucan's jaw tightened. I'm the man who just bought every match she had, and I think you should lower your voice before I make a call you won't like. Cline hesitated. The confidence in Lucan's tone, the quiet authority made him pause. But anger quickly returned. You think money gives you the right to? The door creaked open behind them. Alden Wynn appeared weak and trembling, wrapped in a blanket. His eyes were confused, unfocused. Clara, what's happening? Clara rushed to him. Papa, it's okay. This man helped me. He bought all the matches. Cline pointed a finger toward Alden. You owe me rent, Wynn. Don't think bringing strangers here will save you. Tomorrow you're both out. Alden flinched at the shouting, clutching the doorframe for balance. Lucan stepped closer, his expression turning cold. You'll do no such thing. These people need help, not threats. You'll get your rent and you'll leave them alone. Cline's mouth twisted. You don't scare me, city man. Lucan reached into his coat, pulled out his wallet, and dropped a stack of bills in the snow between them. That's 2 months' rent. Now get out of here. For a moment, neither man moved. The wind hissed through the alley snow, swirling between them like white smoke. Cline finally bent down, snatched the money, and muttered, You'll regret this, before stomping away into the night. When the sound of his boots faded, silence returned. Clara exhaled shakily, then looked up at Lucan. Thank you, she whispered. Lucan knelt to her level. You don't have to thank me, Clara. You've been braver than most grown men I know. Alden's eyes, though dim with illness, softened. You helped us. Why? Lucan hesitated. Because once a long time ago, I wish someone had stopped for me. He looked around the small room as they stepped inside. Cracked walls, a single bed, a table with a half-burned candle. On the table lay a small wooden bird, rough but beautiful. Clara noticed his gaze. Papa made that, she said proudly. It's a Christmas bird. It carries wishes. Lucan smiled faintly. Then maybe it carried mine tonight. He found an extra blanket in the corner and wrapped it around Alden's shoulders. I'll call a doctor, he said. We'll get you warm first. Clara nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. You're like the man in the stories Papa used to tell, the one who brings light. Lucan looked at her, the candle's glow reflecting in his eyes. No, Clara, he said softly. You are. Outside the storm howled, but inside that tiny room the world felt still. 2 lives touched by kindness, one man quietly rediscovering his own heart beneath the snow. The next morning, Raven Creek lay quiet beneath a new layer of snow. The storm had passed, leaving the sky pale blue and the air so cold it glittered. Inside the small shack behind Cline's store, a weak thread of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the wall. Lucan Graves sat in the only chair, his coat still on, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. On the bed, Wynn slept at last, his breathing more, even after the doctor's visit during the night. Clara had curled up on a pile of blankets beside him, her tiny hand resting on her father's arm. Lucan had stayed awake through it all. The doctor's tired voice, the faint rattle of the old heater, the steady fall of snow outside. He didn't know why he couldn't leave. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was the way the candlelight had danced on Clara's sleeping face, soft and peaceful after so much fear. When the knock came, it startled him. He rose, opened the door, and found Isolde Venn standing in the snow, a long coat wrapped tight around her. Her dark hair, normally precise and smooth, was tousled by the wind. "Lucan," she said, breath visible in the cold, "you didn't answer your phone all night. The board meeting's in 2 hours." "I know," he said, quietly. Isolde's gaze moved past him, taking in the small, dim room. "This is where you've been?" she asked, disbelief flickering across her face. "With strangers." "They're not strangers," he replied. "They're people who needed help." Her brows furrowed. "You're not responsible for every broken thing you see, Lucan. You built your life to get away from all this." He studied her for a moment. "And what if getting away was the mistake?" Isolde looked at him sharply. "You sound sentimental. That's not you." Lucan turned back toward the bed. "Maybe it should be." Clara stirred, then blinking sleepily. When she saw Isolde, she sat up, cautious but curious. "Is that your friend?" she asked Lucan, softly. He smiled faintly. "Yes, this is Isolde." The little girl nodded politely. "Good morning, ma'am." Something in her small voice, the innocence, the quiet dignity, made Isolde pause. She had spent years climbing ladders built on ambition and ice, yet this tiny child's courtesy struck deeper than any boardroom conversation ever had. "How's your father?" Isolde asked, surprising herself. "Better," Clara said. "The doctor gave him medicine. Mr. Graves paid for it." Lucan said nothing, just poured Isolde a cup of coffee and handed it to her. She hesitated before accepting her gloves, brushing his hand. They stood together near the door, watching Clara help her father sip water. "You know this isn't sustainable," Isolde whispered. "You can't save everyone." Lucan nodded slowly. "I know, but I can start with one." Isolde's gaze softened despite herself. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "Do you remember when we launched the company?" he asked. "We said we wanted to change the world. Somewhere along the way that meant algorithms and money. But maybe changing the world starts with this." He gestured toward the fragile scene before them, a father and daughter holding on to what little warmth they had. For once, Isolde didn't argue. Outside footsteps crunched on the snow. A shadow crossed the window. Lucan tensed instinctively. The door swung open without knocking. Harold Cline, his expression sour, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. "I see the doctor's been here," he said. "Don't think that changes anything. You can't squat on my property forever." Lucan stepped between him and the bed. "You got your money, Mr. Cline. Now you'll leave them in peace." Cline's eyes flicked toward Isolde. "And who's this, another charity worker?" Isolde's voice was cool, sharper than Lucan's. "No, I'm the one who makes calls when people like you overstep. Do you really want that attention, Mr. Cline?" For the first time, Cline faltered. He muttered something under his breath, turned and stomped out. Lucan closed the door firmly and exhaled. The silence that followed felt heavy but calm, as though the room itself had taken a breath. Alden's weak voice broke it. "You didn't have to fight for us, mister." Lucan turned to him. "Maybe I did." Alden's eyes fogged, but Kind studied him. "You've got sadness in you. I can see it." Lucan smiled faintly. "Used to. Maybe a little less now." Clara climbed off the bed and handed him one of her match bundles. "For you," she said, "so you won't forget the light." He took it gently, staring at the tiny sticks tied with string. "I won't," he promised. Isolde watched, saying nothing. Something deep within her, the part she'd kept buried under schedules and numbers, began to shift. As they left later that morning, the air was crisp, the snow dazzling under the sun. Clara waved from the doorway, her face bright with hope. Lucan raised a hand in return, feeling the small bundle of matches warm in his pocket. "Lucan," Isolde said quietly as they walked toward the car, "you've changed." He glanced at her. Maybe I just remembered who I was before I got lost. She nodded slowly. Then maybe we both did. They stood for a moment watching the light break through the clouds, soft golden and full of promise. Somewhere behind them, a little girl's laughter rang out pure as the morning air. And for the first time in years, Lucan Graves felt the world turn gentle again. By nightfall, the storm had returned. The snow came heavier than before, sweeping across Raven Creek like a white tide. Lucan stood by the motel window, watching the wind swirl under the streetlights. In the bed behind him, Clara was asleep, her head resting on her father's arm. Alden's breathing was slow but steady, the color returning to his face. For the first time in years, Lucan felt something close to peace. Yet peace in small towns rarely lasted long. A sharp knock shattered the quiet. He turned. Isolde, who had been reading by the table, frowned. "It's late," she said. "Who would—" The knock came again, louder. Lucan opened the door. Harold Cline stood there, his face red from the cold and drink. His breath steamed, his eyes burning with anger. "You think you can humiliate me in my own town," he hissed. "You think throwing money at me makes you better?" Lucan stayed calm. "Go home, Cline. You've had enough." But Cline pushed past him, staggering inside. "You don't belong here," he snapped. "People like you drive through, play hero, and leave. But I'm the one who keeps this place running." Clara stirred in her sleep. Alden opened his eyes, confused, trying to sit up. "Papa," Clara murmured. Lucan stepped forward. "Leave now, or I'll—" Cline swung his arm, knocking a lamp from the table. The bulb shattered, plunging half the room into darkness. Isolde gasped. "Stop," she said sharply. "You're frightening them." But Cline was beyond reason. "That man owes me," he shouted, pointing at Alden. "He owes me months of rent." Lucan grabbed his arm, forcing him back. "He owes you nothing now." The two men stood inches apart. For a moment, only the wind howled through the broken window. Then Cline shoved him, stumbling toward the bed. Clara screamed as her father tried to rise, but his legs gave out. The old man fell, striking his head on the nightstand. Lucan reacted instantly. He caught Cline's coat and slammed him against the wall. "Enough," his voice shook with a fury he hadn't felt in years. "You've done enough harm." Cline's eyes widened, not from fear, but realization. He saw in Lucan's expression something more dangerous than anger resolve. The door burst open again. Two police officers stepped inside, snow swirling in with them. Isolde had called them moments earlier. "Mr. Cline," one officer said sternly, "that's enough. You're under arrest for trespassing and assault." Cline stammered, his bluster collapsing. He attacked me." The officer looked around the wrecked room, then at the trembling girl clutching her father's hand. "Save it," he said. They took Cline by the arms and led him out into the storm. When the door closed, silence fell again, thick, fragile. Clara knelt beside her father, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, please wake up." Lucan crouched next to her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "He's breathing," he said softly. "He'll be all right." Isolde brought a wet cloth from the sink and pressed it to Alden's temple. "The cut's small," she said, voice trembling but firm. "He just needs rest." Minutes passed before Alden's eyes fluttered open. "Clara," he whispered. "I'm here, Papa." She smiled through her tears. "You're safe now." Lucan stepped back, letting them have the moment. The adrenaline drained from his body, replaced by a quiet exhaustion. He turned toward the shattered window. Outside, the snow was still falling, endless, steady, and strangely peaceful. Isolde joined him, her voice low. "You could have walked away, you know. No one would have blamed you." He looked at her. "I think I've walked away too many times already." They stood in silence. Inside, Alden hummed softly the tune of a Christmas hymn, broken but tender. Clara joined in, her small voice trembling, but pure. Lucan felt something loosen in his chest. The fear, the loneliness, the years of closing himself off, they melted like ice before a flame. When the song ended, Clara turned toward him. "Mr. Graves," she said shyly, "Papa says you should come tomorrow for Christmas breakfast. We'll have pancakes if we can find flour." Lucan smiled, the expression unfamiliar but welcome. "I'd like that," he said, "but only if you promise to let me bring the syrup." She laughed softly, a sound so full of life that it made Isolde blink away sudden tears. Later, when the lights were low and the room quiet again, Lucan stepped outside. The cold bit his face, but he didn't mind. He looked up at the sky where snowflakes drifted through the light like tiny sparks. In his pocket, he still carried the small bundle of matches Clara had given him. He struck one. The flame glowed bright against the dark, small, trembling, but alive. For a moment, he imagined another night long ago of a boy standing in the snow, wishing someone would stop. No one had then, but tonight he had. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the flame on his skin. "Merry Christmas," he whispered to the child he once was, to the girl who had reminded him what light meant, and to the world that for a moment felt good again. The match burned low, then went out, leaving behind a curl of smoke that rose into the falling snow. Not an ending, but a promise. Morning came softly over Raven Creek. The storm had quieted, leaving the town blanketed in a calm silver glow. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, and church bells chimed in the distance, slow and peaceful. It was Christmas morning. In the small motel room, light filtered through the curtain, touching Clara's sleeping face. Her hand rested on her father's chest, rising and falling with each steady breath. The air smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. Lucan Graves stood by the window, his coat draped over a chair, watching snowflakes dance outside. For once, he wasn't thinking about meetings, deadlines, or the market, only about the quiet sound of a child's laughter the night before and the small bundle of matches still tucked in his pocket. Behind him, Isolde poured coffee into 2 paper cups. "I called the board," she said. "They can survive a few days without you." He smiled slightly. That must have shocked them. "Probably," she replied, "but maybe they needed it." They shared a brief laugh, the kind that comes not from humor but from relief, from realizing that something heavy has lifted. A soft voice interrupted them. "Good morning." Clara was sitting up, hair tousled, her eyes bright with sleep. "Papa's still resting, but he's better," she said. "I think he dreamed about Mama." He smiled. Lucan crouched down beside her. "That's a good dream," he said. "You must have helped make it happen." She shook her head. "No, you did." He looked at her, really looked, and thought how strange it was that a life so full of emptiness could be changed by someone so small. Isolde handed Clara a small box wrapped in newspaper. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. Clara gasped. "For me? Open it." Inside was a simple wool scarf, new, soft and blue like the winter sky. Clara held it up, eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful." Lucan watched something tightening in his throat. "Blue suits you," he said. "It's the color of hope." She grinned, wrapping it around her neck. "Papa says hope is stronger than cold." Lucan smiled. "Your papa's right." They spent the morning together, sharing coffee and laughter, fixing the broken lamp, and letting the sunlight chase the shadows from the room. At noon, Alden woke fully, his mind clearer than it had been in weeks. He looked around, confused at first, then smiled when he saw Lucan and Isolde. "Guess we've got company," he said weakly. Lucan helped him sit up. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Wynn." Alden's eyes softened. "You've given us more than Christmas, son. You gave us another chance." Lucan did not know what to say. He only nodded, the words caught somewhere deep inside. Later, when it was time to go, Clara walked with them to the door. "Will we see you again?" she asked quietly. Lucan knelt. "You will," he said, "and I'll bring pancakes next time. You bring the matches." She giggled, then hugged him tightly. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Graves." "Merry Christmas, Clara." Outside, the world shimmered under sunlight. Isolde walked beside Lucan in silence until they reached the car. Finally, she spoke. "What now?" Lucan looked back toward the small building where smoke rose gently from the chimney. "Now," he said slowly, "I start building something that matters." She raised a brow. "Something?" He nodded. "A foundation. For kids like her, for people who need light when the world forgets them." Isolde smiled faintly. "The candlelight foundation." Lucan turned toward her, surprised. Then he laughed softly. "You've always known how to name things." As they drove away, the town grew smaller in the mirror, fading into the whiteness. The radio played a quiet carol, the kind that sounds like memory, gentle, bittersweet, eternal. Lucan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out one match from the bundle Clara had given him, and struck it against the dashboard. A tiny flame flickered to life, golden against the cold light of day. He watched it burn for a moment, then blew it out softly. Smoke curled upward, vanishing into the air, but the warmth lingered. Sometimes he thought a single spark is enough. Today's story comes to an end, but its echo still lingers in the heart. What do you think? Give us a score from 1 to 10 and feel free to share a few words in the comments. Every voice here is valued and heard. Before you go, let me ask you gently, are you doing okay today? If your heart feels heavy, let this place be a quiet corner where you can share and find comfort. See you again in the next bedtime story, where love and hope remind us that no matter how dark the night may seem, kindness will always prevail.